Welcome to the Visible Art of Translation podcasts. This series of podcasts are part of the EU-funded INCREC project. Our focus is creativity, translation and technology in literary and audiovisual translation. Our goal with this series is to give visibility to the often invisible skills, role and voice of professional translators.
Meritxell Salvany Balada holds a degree in English from the University of Barcelona, where she also studied Swedish language. Between 1983 and 86, she obtained her diplomas in French and Italian. Thanks to the Swedish Institute, she studied Swedish at different folk high schools and Nordic literatures at the University of Stockholm. She has translated around 80 novels and children's books, mostly from Norwegian and Swedish, but also from Danish and Icelandic into Catalan. In recent years, she has translated, amongst others, works by Ingmar Bergman, Maj Sjöwall, Ellen Kullhed and Dag Hammarskjöld from Swedish, by Jon Fosse, Ellen Lu, Maria Parr, Ingun Thon, Linn Ullman and Sigrid Undset from Norwegian, by Dorte Nors and Mette Wetsø from Danish, and by Arndis Thorarinsdottir from Icelandic. She very much enjoys making it possible that Scandinavian authors from present and past may be read in the Catalan language. Hello, Meritxell. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Hello.
So I first would like to ask you a bit about your translation journey. How did you decide to become a translator? How did you get here?
Well, it was like something quite like an instinct. Well, the first entrance door was the discovery of literature and dictionaries and languages. And I had two brothers who were quite older than me, and they had all these books. Well, actually, they left home when I was 4 but I had all these books from Spanish philologies and dictionaries. And then, well, there was all this situation of Catalan at that time, well, when the dictatorship died, I was 7. So actually, I was one of the few persons that had a chance to attend a Catalan school. We had a Spanish language as a subject, but the school was everything in Catalan. That was very unusual. And at that time, it was a private school.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, because of my father's job and so, I went to public Spanish school. But I think this was like decisive for me, the importance of this little language that was very, very weak. And then when you were home, you could speak it, but then in the street, the majority, also the social environments, people in general turned into Spanish. The TV was in Spanish. We didn't have a Catalan TV. We had small Catalan spaces in Spanish TV.
Mm-hmm.
So all this made me feel that it was important that we could also contribute in some way to expand what we could read. For instance, all the adventure books and children's books were in Spanish. There were very little children's books in Catalan. So all this made me conscious. And then important factor was that in science and maths, I was not very good. I could feel that I was more gifted with humanities. And then, well, I took then at the end of high school, I took Latin courses and I had very good grades. So, and then when I was 16, I already could speak French, Italian, Catalan, and Spanish. And I started with English because I saw that it was important. And then when I was in France studying French, I had to share corridor with a series of Swedish people. And I got like shocked by that language. People say, no, but you should study German, Japanese, a big language. So, and I say, no, I want to study this one. And then yeah, it was like because I was in a very Catalan environment. We don't have Spanish relatives, so my grandfather, great grandfather, all those have spoken always in Catalan, and they were like my father read Catalan poetry, and he liked the literature. He had a friend who was a writer, a Catalan writer, So this sensitivity was there. But everyone in my family was working in banking, in finance. And it was like a kind of rebellion, right? Well, I also had my banking time. But then it's like, yes, I just then, well, I did, yes, English, because obviously I couldn't study Swedish here. And I did English philology, but I took also Italian. And then I got to Sweden first time when I was 19. I started studying alone before starting university, actually, when I was 17 in France, because I knew the Swedish people. So there I began like hunting books and grammar, and I did it all alone. Because and then you can imagine that at that time there was no internet, no WhatsApp, no nothing, and no Gmail, nothing. And I started like this. Then I started English language and literature at the University of Barcelona. And by the third year, I went on with Swedish. With I also found somebody who gave me private lessons, a Swedish biologist who was working here. In fact, he was one of the creators of the first Swedish Catalan dictionary, and well, the only one we have actually. And when I was at third year, I had to actually choose another language. It could be German, Dutch, or Swedish. And the Swedish was brand new. And then from Swedish, I went to summer courses in Sweden, thanks to the Swedish Institute. First time I was 19. But in 1994, I had the chance to, the Swedish teacher at the university, to translate a book by Tove Jansson, a Moomin book.
Mm.
And from then, well, for many years, it was like I combined. Well, as it might be, I was working in hospitals as research secretary, translating. Also, this year, it's 30 years I translated my first book. But in the first year, so I did many other work. And then when I was almost 50, 10 years ago, I decided that I would only translate literature. And that's what I do.
So was Tove Jansson the first book you translated from
Yes,
Swedish?
it
Or-
was. It was.
Wow. It's you already started from classic.
Yeah, well, that's, the publishers propose, and then if you have a calendar, you do it. Also because of this thing of the Catalan publishing that was opening very slowly, and they were doing, the Catalan government with the university organized like a cultural collaboration that took place in all the spring 1995, if I'm not mistaken. And we had art exhibitions, the translation of this book, literature, but also we had a visit of a Finnish architect. So it was like a Nordic spring, right?
Mhm.
And kind of cultural activity to make the Nordic countries more known here in Catalonia. But then there was the Nordic crime novel boom,
Yeah.
and then I was asked that. And for many years, people also asked me crime novels, and because they thought it was my specialty and that I loved them. And I'm not a crime novel reader. I've never been. I have some that I read, but I am more interested in the social context that there is in a crime novel. That
Mm.
P.D. James, I love P.D. James. It's crime, but it shows you also society, right? But it was not like it was my thing. I wanted to do other things very, very much. But also, I don't know, I thought that it was difficult. Even I didn't want to translate into Spanish because I thought that there were many people capable of doing much better than I did. And for me, it was less natural. And so at the beginning, it was not easy. And then I also saw that having a steady work in something else was wise, in the sense that indirectly gave me other abilities and other knowledges, that because in the novel you have many kinds of characters and people and cultural references that have to do with other professions and other context. So I think that's something that maybe seemed contradictory. That specialization is good, and there are very good literary translators into Catalan that come from other fields like biology, law, economics, mathematics. So I think that's also because literature has to do with life. Life is varied. So knowing other contexts from the close point of view can help you, right? And for instance, as I worked 7 years at a hospital, when I translate things that have to do with illness, medicine, doctors, hospital organization, or medical terms, people say, "Oh, it sounds very natural."
Mm.
But when, for instance, I have a sport in a novel, football, and that for me, it's real difficult. And I have to ask people if there is football, it has to be football, and you have to do it natural and fine, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just a bit side question, but do you consult anyone often when you translate? Like you mentioned with football, do you ask anyone?
I wouldn't say often, but now because of technologies, actually, you can have access to many professional terms. And also in Catalan, now we have database that there are specified by professionals. You have the dictionary, but then you have this service of terminology that you can ask if you don't find the word or but yeah, I have people that I have known now for many years. I don't know, for instance, if there is an issue of neurology or finance, I don't know, something like on the stock market. I have economists, I have neurologists, I have psychiatrists that more than asking, I say, well, this sentence sounds natural to you. Would you say it in another way? Or I like doing it, and I think it's very enriching, and I think that well, it's the thing to be done.
I also like this aspect of literary translation that it's very
Yeah.
enriching experience and broaden your perspective and
And something which is very funny is that I've done that, well, I don't know, maybe 3 times. Well, with the Ski Federation, I talk quite a bit because translating Nordic, there are lots of vocabulary of skiing equipments and all that, and then, but again, as in Catalan, that sounds like almost incredible, but well, I think that now all the languages are like experiencing because reality is giving place to new things that before did not exist. For instance, with COVID, there was like a COVID vocabulary that, so now you can say that of the language has to adapt to the new reality in the new social economic context, the climate change. So all this gives to new vocabulary. But in Catalan, it's been quite more a little bit more so but because sometimes as the language was not like allowed to be spoken in administrations or we had not that so we had to do much more work about that.
great. So many different topics. Yeah.
Yeah, because I have also done many different genders. So, and then only in crime novel, there is not only crime, there is also big context that. And one time I talked to a parachutist instructor because I had a parachute scene. And yeah, that was like also quite new for me.
Okay, very interesting. So you translated quite some different authors from Scandinavian languages, and I wonder if you have
Yeah.
a translation which has a special place in your heart, which you enjoyed the most.
I think you spend many hours with the book you translate, and I actually think, well, it has to be so. You have to like, read it, and you have to like infuse yourself with that work, so that then it can like emerge from your stomach with a natural character. And then in the end, even books that actually I would never read and I don't like much, they all have a place. But yes, definitely there are books that I actually love and books that I translated 20 years ago, and I still remember sentences or I still remember in which page there is that sentence. But well, As in, well, I translated recently that has never been done into Catalan, Ingmar Bergman's Laterna Magica, the magic lantern. So the memories of Ingmar Bergman. And I got a copy of the book in a sale in Stockholm. And, in a square, there was this secondhand book sale.
Mhm.
And I read it and I was like, wow. And the whole book impressed me. But when he talks about the death of their parents, right? And because as well, my parents died when I was 30, so many years ago. But as they had me when they were quite old, I knew that it was going to happen and that they would die before what I would have wished. But that was something that impacted me a lot. The way he described that moment, especially with mother's death in the beginning of the book. Actually, I learned Swedish with Bergman's movies. I sat there, and when at the first course that it was in a village in central Sweden, which is called Malung. And there in the afternoon, they had like a small cinema and they run films. Well, yes, I had studied drama before and knew the words, but it was different to have a listening. And I sat there and like swallowed it. And I didn't understand at the beginning, but every afternoon I got there and I like swallowed a couple of movies. I didn't understand anything, but the course lasted 3 weeks and a half or something like that. And I remember that the 12th or the 13th day that I sat in the cinema, I began to understand things, right? So that book, I think it has something very special. And then it's a book that it's like slippery in the sense that everybody says Bergman's memory, but there is a part of fiction there. And it has been fascinating translating it after so many years that we have YouTube, that we could go and find so many that documents. In Spanish, the book was translated in 1987 when it was published, and I think in the most languages was like that. But obviously, then you don't had all the documental databases. Almost contemporarily, and well, a bit before I started with one book that it's her daughter Lynn Ullman, but she writes in Norwegian. So translating the point of view of her and then the point of view of him, it was also very, very nice. And then another author that obviously I actually am very attracted and translating it, it feels like it's difficult. I don't know, it's difficult to explain, but Jon Fosse. I discovered him 12 years ago or so, and I think, oh, I want to translate him. But I saw that for the Catalan market, it was special, and I tried to contact some publishers, and nobody knew about him. But actually, it's something very special. He doesn't write full stop sentences, so it's the whole book. It's like a giant paragraph. I have developed also my technique to. So you have to be prepared psychologically to go that and to have very clear that. And then it's funny because then when I finished one Fosse and I start with an author that actually uses full stop, sometimes I have to to be careful because I like I have to review that I put the full stop where it is. So Fosse for me, it's like a wave of art, and it's fabulous.
Mhm.
It's fabulous.
So, in our podcast, we are also interested in creativity and creative process. So, maybe Fosse is a good example of
Yeah,
how you are being
yeah,
creative
yeah.
when you work with his texts. Maybe you can tell something interesting about your creative process.
Well, then we'll speak about creativity because I wouldn't call creativity in translation, but I will explain that later on. But yes, what happens? Jose has this, well, these characters that usually they are alone and they have these internal monologues, like a flow. It's like a sea of words and thoughts, and then usually they are temporal. You can infer that, especially the latest books I have, that they are 60s, 70s, 80s. So, and they are fishermen and they are sailors and quite masculine people from that west coast of Norway. And then there is a lot of this, in Catalan we call rapapiés. This, oh, no, yes, but oh, no, I don't know. Yes, do I? No, I don't think. So this kind of, you have to find the right way of because these are not words. These are like, there is a word for that. These are like meta words, no? It's like sounds you make to try to express a feeling of discomfort or worry, but they're not words. They are I, oh. So, and Fosse explained in one of his interviews that when he wrote Morgon och kväll, in Catalan it's called Matí i tarda, morning and afternoon, which should be in English, I guess. I don't know. There is a character who, well, the first part is this character being born. And then the second part of the book is this character that is actually dead, but he doesn't know yet. And he wonders until the end, it's obvious that he's dead. And but he explains that the first part he wanted the narrator be the baby which had not been born already. But it was so difficult that he changed strategy, and it was the father waiting for this child to be born that conducted the narration. And then in the second part, yes, you have the old character that tells you about his life, and so, and that's another interesting thing with Fosse is that most of his characters are either dead or about to die in this transit, and this makes it also very interesting because the language is very free. It's and then he does this that sometimes he combines. There is a sort of agrammaticality that he changes from past to present, and then he mixes demonstratives, this or that in the same sentences, and that I find fascinating.
And how do you transfer this grammaticality to Catalan? Are there any means to do it?
Well, when I got into the character and understand the situation, and that you also have to like justify to the publisher because sometimes that becomes the corrector and say no, and you say no, yes, this is like this. Like in septology, well, he uses the Rimbaud famous sentence, "Je et un autre." Well, that he changed. So there is a subject which is a second. For instance, I don't in the heat of the moment. I don't have the sentence in the head, but the subject is first person, the verb is second person.
Mm.
And so he does that. Well, actually, very interested author. But also, there is some young women authors that I really liked, and one is Elin Kulhet, who write Euphorie, because also she takes things to the limit and explores the inner self in a way that is very interesting. And I like her very much.
Okay, so sounds like quite challenging authors for a translator. Yeah, so we briefly touched up on creativity, and so
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what for you, what creativity in translation is for you.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I am not sure if we should call it creativity. For me, it's like meta creativity. It's something that goes beyond. So it's what comes after the creativity of someone else. And yes, sometimes it makes me a bit sad is that people, yeah, we spoke about the visibility of the translator and then the creativity. And then you see that some translators, literary translators, are more appreciated when they have written fiction themselves. But yeah, we are authors. Yeah, we are authors because we create a text in our language. But is that text ours? Yeah, but it's not creative writing. I think it's meta creative. And then it's not fair that in order that the public appreciate your effort, have to compare you to a fiction writer.
Do you mean that a translator also works as a writer? Or
Or yeah,
they're more appreciated when they do both? Or
yeah, sometimes there are many translators that starts as a translator, but then write literary fiction, which is their creative fiction. And yeah, in the media, or it seems that they are more capable or more valuable, or and this is unfair. I have written some fiction, but yeah, a few short stories, but they are all published. It's something I did some 15 years ago, and I wrote 3 or 4 short stories. But then it's like translation. It's what bites me harder, and I maybe someday I write, but I'm not better or worse because I have written this fiction. I could have not have written, and it's different things. And then you define literary translation with a word which is creative that is applied to original literary work. But I think that our work is different. It's something we do. So yeah, it's our text, and we are the authors of this text. But it's like we are more like bridge builders. Like it's difficult to, what? So the text, the language, and the final form I have given to that is my creation. But it has to be subdued. I can be flexible. But my creative decisions, or the fact that I wander off the original, that change this or that word, or that I make a short explanation to get into context, something that in our culture is not. No, all these decisions, they are subdued, but they are more technical than creative. It's like for me, I think of an architect that plans something, a very artistic building with strange forms, innovative. But then it would come civil engineer and we say, no, wait, this tone, the color is very beautiful, but you cannot use it because if you want this height of the building, this will not hold. Or a fashion designer that creates a collection and it's very beautiful on the paper and it has invented this collection, but then comes the person who cuts the pattern, and the person who sews it says no, sorry, but it is, these waves that your skirt must, if you use this will not have the same effect. So yeah, we're like tailors. You know that your main work is not so much to create something, but to reproduce it in a way that doesn't crumble and that recreates, not create, recreates the effect of the original in a way that feels natural to your reader, the author's reader. But, oh, well, I hope I've explained myself because it's something quite abstract what we do. No, it's not, I don't know.
I also can hear from your view and explanation that a translator works in between some limitations or boundaries where when a translator recreates because it stems from the author's ideas and I'm also wondering, in your opinion, how far can a translator go away from the original, take freedom, or should the translator try to be very close to the original? Yeah.
Your freedom should affect mainly the formal aspect of the language, the words, but never the contents. Well, I'll give you some examples also that I think they are quite graphic. When I translate, for instance, from Nordic languages, this is also changing because I see that now Nordic writers that write very long sentences, but originally, so as you know, Germanic languages and Scandinavian languages are like, it's more like laconic. It's like more shorter sentences. Sometimes it can have a finality, a purpose. But if in Catalan I make a character speak like, yesterday I went to the movie. When I got home, I ate a cake. In Catalan, you say, yesterday I went to the movies, and we use connectors. And now that's like, I see that, I think that this is also the impact of the technologies, that everything has to be fast. All the connectors away. No, it gives the rhythm. Then another problem, when you have a language, if I translate, for instance, if I wanted to, I have actually translated one book from Italian, a novel for young people. If you read a text which has been translated from Italian, the Catalan, because the affinity of both languages, that many words will sound the same. But when I translate from Nordic language, sometimes I find words that are, well, then I have this compound word that in Norwegian or in Swedish, they are very short. But then in Catalan, maybe it becomes half a sentence. Then we have the articles that they stuck in the end. But what I mean that the text expands sometimes, well, most times. It can happen exceptionally that it's on the contrary. Because in Catalan, we have something which is it's called the weak pronouns. They substitute a word, and if the word is very long, then it's, but then what can happen also is that you translate a sentence, and for instance, a pink tissue rose. You imagine that you have a jacket, and in the neck it has a pink tissue rose, like a garment there. In Catalan, it is una rosa de roba rosa. This is very difficult to say, but this is a real example of a novel. And then this like a word game sounds. Then I wrote una flor de tela rosa to avoid. Is that creativity? Is that freedom? I don't know. I think it's a technical ability to conduct something in the best way you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have done the effort to think about it, but I'm not sure I have created something. And I have not wandered from the original. But yes, I have thought of a series of tools and techniques that allow me to write, to reproduce this sentence in a way that doesn't sound unpronounceable, ridiculous to my reader.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So I understand how the role of the translator is quite complicated because
Yeah,
it's a mix of different things,
yeah,
and but also yeah, it's very deep topic,
yeah,
also philosophical, right? But I'm also wondering. So we've been talking a little bit about technology and tools, and I wonder if you use any tools when you translate. What is your opinion about it? Yeah.
yeah. My opinion about it is, again, that it's a tool, and artificial intelligence, in my opinion, should only be considered as a tool to stimulate human talents and ability in general. In a context where this is not so, we should rather call it artificial idiocy. I mean, yeah, technology has to remain a tool developed by capable, empathic, human professionals at all levels. But I think that's the point. It's a tool that can make us very happy and make our lives quite easier because we can. But it's a tool that must allow us to think and to be beyond, but not replace us. So that's clearly for me.
Do you feel an impact of the machine translation or artificial intelligence on your work? Can you imagine yourself, yeah, using it?
Well, I use online dictionaries and databases, But translating, no. What I can, in another context, in technical text, for instance, but then it has to be well done because there are mistakes of automatic translate. But actually, when I was working in scientific context, I saw it, and that technical text comes. But then there is depending on the language, but English. So if you translating into scientific English, the level of performance is very good. But literary is different. Then because we have this onomatopoeia, what we spoke about this moment, but that I, O, you, yai. Then there are the jokes. Then there are like the synonyms that doesn't sound like ridiculous, the rhymes.
Mm.
So I remember some, especially one time that I had like not broken, but I have a problem in one of my wrists. I cannot move it for a few days. It's very painful. Yeah, I can see that if you have broken your hand and you have to type out 100 times, then, but then I think that a translator that knows what he's doing, he will like translate the text, but then he will end typing everything at his. Sometimes, well, I can also use it. How can I say that? Then I can like try from the checking this original sentence, and I can go to Google Translate and see how this is translated, and then it's you can detect there that, for instance, a second meaning. So it's interest in the sense that obviously you learn from everything. But I think that we cannot allow that art and in creativity annihilate the human maker. I will not say creator, because, but the human work must rule at all times. And I think that people are very scared. Well, I think that, yeah, in photography and plastic art, that's something completely different. So there, yeah, maybe you can be scared. But I think that we create language, but because sometimes also if the original sort of invents a word, you will also have to invent a word in, especially in children's books.
Mm.
And I don't know if I answered what you expected or
I think it's very important, interesting to me to hear your perspective on,
mm,
because there is a lot of also talking about technology in the media, which
yeah,
sometimes doesn't have anything to do with reality.
yeah,
So that's also what we try to do. We try to talk more about our profession, and that's not everything can be just easily replaced. Yeah,
yeah.
also.
But then it's like everything. And what I don't want to transmit is that artificial intelligence is bad. Actually, my daughter works in artificial intelligence applied to other things, scientific context.
Mm,
So it's not bad, but it's like everything. It has it's the use we make of it which can be good or bad.
mm,
And in our case, I think that we must, so all the research on this automatic translation or whatever should be focused as a tool, but never to displace. But then I mean, you can say everything can be good or bad. Is the drinking water good? Yes, but if you drink 25 liters of water in 2 hours, you will probably have a big problem. Is this or that medicine and aspirin good? Yes, if you use it in the right way. But then also, I think that these social networks we have now, Twitter, which is not called Twitter anymore, I know, but saying X is very strange. All these debate tools where people, um, we tend to polarization, especially in journalism and this. And polarization is never good. Like generalization, you cannot make sweeping statements that apply to everything, right? Like sometimes people ask me, how many words do you translate in an hour? They what? And no, but really, and then they say, it, it depends. If I read the text, sure. So if I don't know
Mm.
a passage of football, I will go slower and I will read it many times. A passage of an autopsy or something that I know, I will go very, very, very fast. And then I will not need that much rereading. So everything depends. You cannot, yeah, but of course to organize big projects you have to have some parameters and some organizing behind but there are things that it's difficult to quantify exactly or to and then polarize, to say, this is terrible, this is fantastic. No, nothing is terrible and nothing is fantastic. It depends on the context you apply it,
Mm. Yeah.
and that's all.
I think it's very interesting conversation we're having, but I think we need to stop here and then yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for your answers.
thank you.
Thank you again to our invited speaker and to our listeners. Thank you for being there and feel free to share our podcasts with your family, friends, and colleagues. This is part of a series of podcasts of the EU-funded INCREC project. So follow us for more episodes and please share your comments on this platform. See you next time.